In November 2015, Arctic released the Liquid Freezer. Then in 2019, it was time for the Liquid Freezer E. And now, where Intel chips have a built-in self-ignition function called boot, the world is finally ready for the Arctic Liquid Freezer E. This has been overdue for quite some time. The Liquid Freezer 2 has been praised by basically everybody for its performance, noise, and especially for the price. And that for basically the day it came out until this morning. But the LF2 being close to 5 years old, things need to change. Things need to become better. This is the brand new Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 in its 420mm version. We got a brand new and way bigger VRM fan, a sophisticated one cable rules them all approach, which is optional, an included contact frame. Arctic finally found out that denser radiators exist, a brand new cold plate and pump design with the pump sitting on the side, and the exact same fans we had before. Wait, what? Yeah, those are still the original Arctic P14 spinning at up to 1700 RPM. But before we talk about anything surrounding this AIO, let's make sure that nobody wastes his time and start off with the benchmarks. We tested the Liquid Freezer 3 in 420, the all-black one, not the ARGB one to be specific. We tested this one using our regular CPU cooler benchmark machine with a 3900K and 3 different presets, 120, 250 and 320 watts. At 120 watts going through the socket, which is roughly what you could expect in a gaming-like workload, we got exactly what we expected, not a whole lot. With the CPU setting at 28.5 degrees C above ambient, the LF3 420 is indeed better than the last generation, but only by a margin of error. In fact, in a range of plus minus 1 degree, we got now a total of 8 coolers. So pushing that little load through coolers that were designed to withstand double, triple of that just creates a giant blurry mess of everything performs kind of the same. But hey, it's at the top of the list, so good job Arctic, I guess. From there we lower the fan speed whilst keeping the pump at 100% and note down the temperature and noise in 10% steps, creating a noise to performance curve. And on this one we can see the giant blurry mess part too. Compared to the previous generation, the LF3 started off slightly colder and actually very slightly quieter, but because the LF2 became quite quickly a lot quieter without becoming much harder, the LF2 started to take over and stayed at the better spot until the very end. Compared to our other 420 contestant, the Alpha Cool Core Ocean, it doesn't look particularly good either. This one starts off much cooler and can be turned down to almost 0 RPM while still being in front. And the same for our high-end 360mm contestants like the Lian Li Galahad Performance and EK Nucleus. Both of them started off much louder, but if turned low enough, they maintained a better ratio. Ignoring these bends, that's just what happens if you got an overpowered fan on top of an overpowered AIO with way too little load. Weird stuff just starts to happen. But on the bright side, once you compare it to your more average 360 AIO, the LF definitely wins. But this was only pushing 120 watts through an AIO which definitely wasn't designed for these things. So let's start doing stuff that these are actually designed for. At 250 watts, we can finally see some differences between all of these high-end coolers. With exactly 55 degrees C above ambient, the Liquid Freezer 3 420 managed to land on the 5th spot, 1.6 degrees in front of the previous generation. However, even if Arctic seems to have made some severe changes to the cold plate and pump, it doesn't seem like it was quite enough to beat some of the 360mm sized AIOs on our list. But that doesn't mean that it can't keep up in the noise department. Compared to the previous gen, we now got a much nicer noise to performance ratio, with the LF3 outperforming from the start and making the difference bigger and bigger the faster the fans spin. And something else quite interesting is that the LF3 420 at 250 watts ends up extremely close to the EK360 AIO, something that wasn't the case at all at only 120 watts. Pushing 320 watts through the socket didn't change much for the position of the new Liquid Freezer. Still at the 5th spot, it is now keeping the CPU at 74.7 degrees C above ambient. But now with a slightly bigger difference of 2.2 degrees compared to the previous gen. Over on the noise to performance graph, we can see that all of the changes that Arctic implemented were worth it. Compared to the LF2, the LF3 was capable of keeping a much better noise to performance performance ratio all across the board. And this time there was literally zero difference to the EK Nucleus CR360, except that it could go on for longer at the cost of noise. Which, by the way, got 2300 RPM quick fans, which may be 120, so it's not like an apples to apples comparison here. Not even talking about 360 versus 420. And on a short side note, if anybody is wondering how we get so high above ambient temperature numbers for 320 watts, we are unlocking that 115 degrees C temperature limit for the CPU, and we stop at 110 because otherwise the list would be very, very short and the noise to performance curves would be like 2 measurements long. So for those who are just here for the benchmarks, it's definitely a beast. Given at very low workloads, let's say you got a 14600K, you will most likely never see a difference between the new and the old liquid freezer, or pretty much any high performance and good AIO. There just isn't nearly enough juice to produce any meaningful difference. For higher workloads, let's say you got a 14700K, a Ryzen 7 900X, there you can start to see differences. Either like 2 or maybe even 3 dBs if you normalize it to temperature, or close to 2 degrees if you let everything run at full speed. And once you go higher than that, the difference will become bigger and bigger up until the point where the LF3 420 can keep a precisely similar noise to performance ratio compared to the very best we have tested today. Or up until today. Until it doesn't, cause the fans can't spin any faster. But not to spoil anything here, but unlike the LF2, the much denser, or also kind of bigger, but we'll get to that, radiator of the LF3 is not only capable of better noise to performance, but you can also get more, just more of everything. But we have another video about that, about the LF3 420 coming very shortly after this one. And if you're looking for the best in slot right now, go check out that video after its release. And now with the benchmarks covered, let's finally talk about the AIO itself. The new liquid freezer exists in a variety of sizes and options. The one that we are covering here today is the all black 420 edition, but if you're into that fairy dust, there is also an ARGB black and ARGB white version. All of these should perform roughly the same. The ARGB white and black will most likely be identical, but the no RGB black one uses regular P14s instead of P14 ARGB fans. And because these are not similar fans, or they are very close, but they are not identical, a certain difference in performance can exist. The Liquid Freezer 3 420 comes in a pretty Arctic style box, quite similar to the LF2, just all blacked out. Included inside we will find the completely pre-assembled AIO, as well as a minuscule box of mounting hardware for all new sockets and some thermal paste. And this little box is quite important because one of the most surprising differences between the Liquid Freezer 2 and 3 is about the mounting. You see, since LGA 1700, the discussions about the LGA retention mechanism being shit really started to take off. And this then led to a number of companies releasing their own contact frame, and now we have a market full of 5-euro contact frames because everybody knows Intel screwed this one up. And apparently Arctic knows that too, hence the included Arctic Intel contact frame. I do have my fair share of concerns about this being the only way to go. First off, because this is a contact frame, there is a limit to multi-socket compatibility, so they had to let go of LGA 1200 and everything before that. However, they did win me kinda over on this regardless, because there is a little gap in the bottom of the IHS if used with the Intel 14th gen chip, and the contact frame itself says 1851. So I am pretty sure that this will be next-gen compatible out of the box and Arctic doesn't need to change anything. But my main concern is still, this is a contact frame, which means that you need to completely remove the original one. Arctic does include all the tools necessary to do that. It's an Allen wrench, and it really isn't that hard. It really isn't. It's like 4 screws. But I feel like it's kinda dangerous to release that onto the general public and make it necessary. If you are an enthusiast, sure, easy going. But imagine someone building his first rig, he never did it, he puts the motherboard into the case first, and then he tries to install this cooler. Oof. I wouldn't necessarily trust him with this. For AMD, on the other hand, there is no contact frame included, but you don't need one. There we can mount it using Arctic's newest approach, and that's basically it. But on that note, let's just go over the installation. For AMD, we first need to remove the two pre-installed retention brackets, slap the included spacers on top, and from there we have these two brackets. Now by default, it makes sense to install the bracket marked with an L on the left side and the one marked with an R on the right side. The thing is though, similarly to what Arctic did on the Liquid Freezer 2, they tried to push the center of the block slightly down on AMD Ryzen CPUs because that had a huge beneficial impact on performance. Unfortunately, on some motherboards this can result in compatibility issues because the heatsink of your, let's say, potential SSD might be too high and it would be touching the two tubes or the outlet and inlet. But Arctic did think about this because these brackets are built in a way that you can switch them around, so the one marked with L on the right side and R on the left side. And yes, this will also lead to having the two letters upside down, but this will then push the whole block up a bit. And actually it's now way more centered than it was previously. The whole AMD CPU will still be covered, that's not an issue, but the whole water block pump and tubes combo will be pushed up to the point where nothing can interfere anymore in the bottom, enhancing the overall compatibility. However, as we are not testing cooler performance on AMD CPUs right now, I don't want to make any assumptions if this will lead to better or worse performance. It might, I don't know yet, or until we have a AMD test bench I won't know, but in the case that the usual installation won't work for your motherboard, you always have the possibility to push everything higher and make it compatible again. And now let's jump over to Intel. Here, please, for the love of God, don't do this once the motherboard is inside the case. If it is, take it out, put it on a carton box, but don't do it in a case. Regardless if you're upgrading or if this is first installed, make sure to install the CPU first, just for motherboard pin protection reasons. And now using the included Allen wrench, we can gradually screw out the 4 screws that keep the retention mechanism in place. Once every screw clicked, indicating that the end of the thread was reached, we get to removing it. But before we do that, we're going to do some finger gymnastics. Keep one finger on the CPU and push it slightly down whilst lifting the whole bracket with your leftover fingers. And because of your excellent finger coordination, you now have a second hand free to use to rotate any screw that might have fallen back into the thread. That happens. Alternatively, you could also try to pull every screw out beforehand by using any other magnetic screwdriver, and then the last step becomes unnecessary. But please make sure to keep the CPU in the socket with the finger whilst lifting the original mechanism. Yes, this is a problem that mostly concerns people who are upgrading the cooler and have leftover thermal paste all over the place. But I have seen too many CPUs getting stuck to that thing and falling back into the socket mid-air, and most of them are not falling straight. You can guess the outcome. Anyway, time for the contact frame. Place it on top of the CPU, make sure that the still present backplate aligns with the holes, and screw it down using the included Arctic screw in an X shape. And don't forget to make it evenly, a bit at a time, until all of them come down somewhat equally. And to finish off this section, for both AMD and Intel, slap some of that included MX6 thermal paste on there, position the pump water block combo onto your chip and screw it down. Overall, the installation process isn't really that complicated and it seems to me very solid. But I do feel like there are going to be chips falling back into the socket because people won't read manuals and they will just go for it, and then stuff will happen. But on a positive note, kudos to Arctic for how consistent this new approach is. The old system used on the LF2 was notorious to have like huge fluctuations in temperature depending on the color of underwear you were wearing that day. Like reinstalling the same cooler on the same day with the same ambient temperature could result in 3, 4, 5 degrees C different results. It was kinda crazy sometimes. But here, the absolute biggest difference I saw in all of the installations, and I had like 5, The biggest difference was precisely 1 degree C above ambient, not more. That was the min and max, so it's very consistent. But let's finally get to all of the changes that Arctic introduces with the LF3, starting off with this totally different water block pump combo. Gone are the days of the Millennium Falcon and the age of the water turbine begins. Similarly to the previous liquid freezer, there is a fan in there, but this time it's significantly bigger and much higher. But don't believe it spans this whole giant thing. Actually, it's just spanning a quite small subset of this whole area. It's still much bigger than what we had before, but not even remotely as big as this whole piece. And by the way, this thing is mounted on there using quite strong magnets, and the up to 2500 RPM quick fan is powered using a push-pin approach. In the bottom, touching the CPU, we got the new and apparently improved cold plate with new fins and water channel design. But interesting here is that the pump is not sitting on top, but towards the bottom or towards the GPU. It is definitely a change in design, considering 99% of AIOs are built with the tubes coming out on the right side of the block. But let's be honest, liquid freezer has always been kinda different. But all of these design changes and the space they want for that new and significantly bigger fan were damn worth it. As a small sidetrack, I did benchmark the VRM fans alone on our regular test bench, and the differences between the LF2 and LF3, they are huge. I did this by simply using the 320 watts workload and then compared all of the readouts that we got with the little fan spinning and not spinning. In total, we got 4 different VRM temperature readouts that we can access, and these are the temps of both the LF2 and LF3 in comparison to having no VRM fan at all. For the first VRM sensor, for example, the older version dropped the temps by 3.9 degrees C, whereas the Liquid Freezer 3 dropped them by 11.5. And this double or almost triple difference came up on every sensor, 2.7 versus 6. 5.3 versus 13. The only odd result we got was where a sensor returned 0.3 degrees more when used with the Liquid Freezer 2, which was really weird because all other numbers, so the starting and ending value, were identical on this sensor here. Weird, but I guess whatever this thing was reading from just wasn't reached by the quite small fan on the LF2. I'm not sure, but the difference between LF2 and LF3 are gigantic. Anyway, we also measured quite the change in RAM temperature. The first stick dropped by 3.4 on the old one and by almost 6 on the new one. This then became almost half for the second stick, but that was very foreseeable as one stick faces the fan and the other one is blocked off by the stick that gets all of the cool air. So aside from the incremental gains Arctic reached in the CPU temperature department, the VRM, or just surrounding temperatures, are a whole different world compared to where we are coming from. These gains are significant. But back to the AIO. The attached tubes are about 400 mm long and adjustable at the water block end. And in an all Arctic fashion, they are quite thick at about 30 mm, but it's not like there's actually more water going through here compared to other AIOs. In the end, we still got that PVM cable for the fans going through it as well, so the actual tube part of these is going to be much smaller. And even if I would have wished for longer tubes, which I really did, I definitely enjoyed this all blacked out design much more than the previous spacey grey-black stuff that was going on. And coming to the fans, we still got the original Arctic P14s going, still 1700 RPM, still 2.4 mm of H2O and still 72.80 CFM. However, there have been some changes on the wiring, some good changes. In the past Liquid Freezer, Arctic used a single cable to power everything, and that cable was passed through the tubes from the water block to the fans. Great approach. However, if you wanted to set the fans to a different PVM percentage than the water block or the VRM fan, you had to start disconnecting stuff and creating your own mess. Now we can choose, because included in the box of goodies we get 2 cables, one that controls everything at once using a single header, and a second one that provides you with 3 individual cables where you can use each as you please. I love this, and for myself I usually just set the pump to 100 and let the fans do their own thing, and here it's finally doable without too much of a hassle, so great job. Oh, and before I forget it, the cable is meant to be connected near the pump. Just make sure to do this and position the cable that comes out of this thing now before you do the installation, otherwise it's going to be a very, very fiddly job. And last but not least, the most important change going from LF2 to LF3 will be the radiator. We still got that iconic 38mm thick red, however, it's different. Where we previously counted about 14 FPI, we now got 15, which is more. But the fins itself have also become wider. The shroud to which we attached the fans used to have a 5.6mm gap, and now we are left with only 3.3. So overall, on the inside, we have quite a big gain in like general radiator real estate compared to what we had before. Something that can be seen in the benchmarks. So where do we stand? It is definitely an improvement. From a bigger and much better performing VRM fan to the general increase in CPU cooling, Arctic did a good job in taking what was working and making it better. And they also improved things that weren't necessarily requested by a wider audience. Like you can now choose if you want to control all of the fans and pump on a single wire, given that the curve for both the VRM fan and pump is extremely steep, but now you can choose the included cable to do your own thing. And this one is really appreciated on my part. As for the installation, AMD is perfectly fine. I see no issue there. For Intel, however, I understand why they did it. The included contact frame feels solid and the installation really isn't that hard. I just have my concerns about letting this loose on like the average 12-year-old. Not even talking about warranty issues if anything goes wrong. But this shouldn't be taken as a negative point. It's a concern, not necessarily a downside. As a whole, I love what Arctic did here. Better performance, for me a more pleasant look, but that's for you to decide, and an overall generational step up. But who is this for? For people with high performance chips. There is no need to go for an AIO this size and this potential if you have a chip that can barely push 100 watts. As we have seen on the 120 watts benchmark chart, there is barely any change and sometimes even a negative one. No, the benefit of the LF3 comes once you go beyond 200 watts. There it becomes one of the best AIOs out there and on par with the very best in Noise 2 performance once the load is high enough. For people with Ryzen 9s, an i7 or higher, absolute recommendation. But wait for the price. According to Arctic, the 420 will be set to 124 euros on their own shop, which funnily enough is less than the Liquid Freezer 2 right now. And if we take a look at the list that we compared today, the only AIO that comes close to that price point is the Alpha Cool one. And on that one, you definitely need to switch the fans out because they sound like a freaking jet engine. And on a side note, I was told that because it's Arctic's 23rd birthday, happy birthday at this point, they wanted to do a 23% discount on MSRP, which would mean that the LF3 420 would start off at 95 euros. Good luck beating that bang for the buck. So if you are about to build a new rig or you're planning to do a major upgrade, better grab one sooner than later. But to end this video, one of the best AIOs I have seen. Not the best, it's not like the first one on the list. Seems like EK still got like the better overall setup here, even at 360mm. But overall, an excellent product in all categories. Overall performance, Noise 2 performance, on par with the EK one actually, but especially the bang for the buck. But okay, this should be all for Arctic and their all-new Liquid Freezer 3 in 420mm. At this point, a huge thank you to Arctic for sending it over. Oh, on a side note, we have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And we got channel membership, so if you are planning to sell your soul for an RG poop emoji, that's one way to go. But if not, I'm also releasing the content to all members 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Except for the NDA stuff, because, you know, I don't want to get sued. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to... Usually I would insert a joke here and reference to another video, but this time I'm just going to shamelessly promote the next video, because we push-pulled the LF3 420, and oh god, there is more performance in there. Like, just adding 3 fans can squeeze so much more out of this thing. Arctic should have definitely redesigned the fans, like both noise, performance and more Noise 2 performance more. It's just more. Anyway, thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.